Now, without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to our author of the evening, Sabaa Tahir. Sabaa is the author of the best-selling fantasy series An Ember in the Ashes, which has been translated into more than 35 languages. The first book in the series was named one of Time's 100 best young adult books of all time. Woo! Her most recent novel, All My Rage, won the National Book Award for Young People's Literature. The Michael L. Printz Award, the Boston Globe Horn Book Award for Fiction and Poetry, and was an instant New York Times bestseller. Thank you for being here with us tonight. And joining her in conversation this evening is Young People's Poet Laureate and New York Times bestselling author Elizabeth Acevedo. Yeah. Her many award-winning books include With the Fire on High, Clap When You Land, and The Poet X, which received the National Book Award for Young People's Literature, among many other awards. We are thrilled to have you both in the store to celebrate the release of Sabaa's newest novel, Heir. And without further ado, let's hand it back over to them.
Thank you. Can I ask you guys all to hold up your book for the gram, please? Thank you. All right, we ready? Let's go. Woohoo! Yeah! Woo! Liz, smile for me. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I am so hyped to be here with Sabaa. I mean, I get asked to do a lot of different moderating things, and I try my best to show up. But when your homegirl comes out with a book that is phenomenal, right, you show up very differently. And just have to say, like, this book blew me away. I stayed up way too late reading, stayed up the whole next day, just didn't do any work, just laid in bed and rotted with the book. I want to talk about from the very beginning. So you wrote this quartet that is the same world. Did you know while you were writing the Ember books that 20 years in the future, I'm going to return to the world?
I did not. I originally I knew the world was big. I knew there were a lot of stories in it, but I did not realize I wanted to tell this story until the summer that I was writing A Sky Beyond the Storm, which is the fourth book in the Ember Quartet. And what happened was I was writing about this baby, and his name was Zacharias, and he was going to one day be emperor of this empire. And as I was writing, I was like, wow, I wonder what's going to happen to this baby. I wonder what life he's going to have. I wonder what it's going to be like for him to be raised by this really hard, difficult, strong, woman, his Aunt Helene. And then I was like, I could actually write that book because that's my character and it's not fan fiction. So that's when I started taking notes and trying to figure out okay, what should I seed in this series in case I decide to go and write that series. So that's when it really began. And then from there, it was really just a matter of figuring out, okay, who are my side characters? And I had a few different ones I had been playing around with, but the character of Sirsha kind of walked into my head fully formed.
My boo.
Yes.
I love her.
She is beloved to a lot of people already, which I love because she was the most fun to write. I knew she was going to be fun when I thought of her and I thought of this line, is there anything worse than wet sock? Yeah. As she's about to get murdered. That's what she's thinking about. She's got people chasing her and she's like, my socks are wet. It's disgusting. Yeah. And once I had that, I knew her story. And then the last character is Aiz. And Aiz is a character who was much trickier to get to know because she keeps her cards very close. And when I first wrote her and I sent the book to my beta reader. And this is for all you writers out there who are like, oh my God, writing is so difficult. I don't know what I'm doing. Guess what? I sent this book to my beta reader and she said, hey, Sabaa, this character is kind of too stupid to live. And that's the ultimate insult for a character. And I was like, oh, really? And she's like, yeah, you got to rewrite her. So that's how difficult she was to write. And then eventually, over the course of a couple of years, I got to know her and understand her a little bit better. And her story is probably the one I'm most proud of because it was really challenging. So that's how they all began.
Okay. You said over the course of a couple of years?
Couple years, yeah.
How long has this book been sitting? Because
4 years, 4 years and change from inception until pub date.
all right, so you all heard the same bio that I heard, right? And so before this book came out and after the quartet, we have, the book that got every single sticker that a book can get. And, right, All of My Rage. So what was the process of writing contemporary fiction after having this massive world and knowing you have this other book in the back of your head that is going to belong to that world? What did it feel like to have to switch through all these creative pathways and even, genre and all kinds of things?
Yeah, no, that's an awesome question. It was a relief, guys, to switch to fantasy. Oh yes.
Yeah.
Give me magic any day of the week. Hi, friends. Sorry, I'm seeing friends. It was a relief to move from contemporary, which is like, you would think that the world building and the rule making and like the expansiveness of fantasy would make it very daunting.
Yeah.
But I find that to be the fun part. I find that to be really exciting. And so when I faced a problem with my characters and All My Rage, I was like, oh, I can't use magic. Like, how do I get them out of the situation? And then actually that kind of made it so their situation just kept getting worse and worse and worse because I was like, I don't know what to do here. Like, I don't know how to get you out of jail. So with Heir, it was a relief to turn to this world and be like, okay, like, let's like visit my old friends, the Jinn. Let's see the new supernatural characters who are coming in. Let's bring our old favorites around. I think one of my favorite comments about this book was from a young guy named James who works at Penguin Teen. And he said, I was so pleased at how often we saw the original members of the first 4 books.
Right.
Like, that was great. And that made me happy because I wanted to revisit them. They were like my friends and I wanted to see them again.
Yes.
So I do feel like that was something to look forward to as I was writing.
Can I ask something that I'm worried might be like too vulnerable? And if it is, we can pivot and I'll just like go somewhere else.
No, please.
But you have a book that at the level of recognition, right? I'm thinking of All of My Rage, which the quartet did amazing, but on a level of, I guess, the outside critic coming in and saying, this is an award-winning novel.
Yeah.
What was the feeling of having to come out with a book after that? And I say this not to put you on the spot, but because I remember all of the things that the pressure can be on that. Did you already have this book in the works? So it's like, well, I'm just moving forward with the plan?
Yeah, I already had it going. So I was like, now this is what's happening. So this is what's happening.
Get on board.
But actually the best thing is Heir is a fantasy and it is commercial facing, which means guess what it doesn't have to deal with? Award committees. I don't think that this type of book does not get recognized by award committees because it's not like a contemporary. Basically, I think when you bleed on a page, you're more likely to be considered for awards, especially if you're a person of color, which really sucks, I would like to say. Like, it is not fair that we have to bleed on a page for our work to be considered for awards.
Right.
This did not cause me any bleeding. This was a joy to write.
Yeah.
And I say that for all you brown kids out there who are writers, like, you can also write books that just make you really happy to write. And that is important.
Yeah.
So that's how I kind of viewed it, is I was like, well, this is not in contention for anything. The only thing I have to worry about is Ember fans coming back and being like, why did you do Helene dirty again? What's wrong with you? Why do you treat her this way? You know, that's my primary concern.
I'm late to the Sabaa boat. And so I didn't know when I would see all the Instagram, like people being really mad at you for killing people. I'm like, how mad could they be? Like people die, right? That happens. And then y'all, I was ready to like text you some angry
Fair? That's fair.
memes.
My husband was reading the book and he got to a certain part and he closed it and he was like, why are you like this? And then he put the book away angrily and he's like, I'm not reading this anymore. And he got up and walked away and then eventually came back and was like, maybe I'll keep reading it, and picked it up.
But it's so wild as a reader because you're like crying your eyes out and you're like so hurt and you're like, oh, it was a joy for you. I'm so glad it was a joy for you that you didn't bleed on the page while I'm over here.
It was fun. You might bleed, but I didn't.
Falling apart. I'm so glad. I think the best fantasy deals with power. And it's very thoughtful about the fact that fantasy is kind of reflecting some of the power dynamics that we actually have in our world, right? It's thinking about how do you become corrupt when you get to a certain point? How do you look away from those in need? How do you become desperate in terms of what you will do and what parts of yourself you'll give up? I think that Heir encapsulates all the ways that no one is actually a hero and that there might be parts of redemption for even the worst villain. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you conceptualize power in your books?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was a little girl, my dad said something to me that I won't forget because I didn't quite understand it when he said it. He said, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I was probably like, I don't know, like 6, 7, something like that when he said this to me. And I was like, Like I had no clue what he was talking about. But it was something that he would say often, in particular when it came to politics, like when he was watching politics on TV, or, you know, he was talking about politics of foreign nations, or my parents were discussing what was happening in Pakistan, which is where my family is from. And that stuck with me. And to this day, I have never, not once, seen a person who has a great deal of power who is not corrupt. That is just not a real thing. I have not seen that. Like generally when you get power, there's just a point at which you have enough and you just start to turn because there's nobody to tell you no. There's nobody to say that's wrong. And I wanted to explore that in the book. And I also wanted to explore the idea of different types of power, like the power that we have as individuals within our own circles of friends, and the power that we have perhaps more broadly for our people. And also like why do we decide to take power? Like, do we do it for selfish reasons, or does it start as an altruistic thing and eventually become something else, right? So that's what I was thinking of as I was writing about power. I also find power dynamics to be something that young people in particular are like. I remember being 14 and starting to understand the idea of power for the first time because I didn't have any and I really wanted some, right? And when I got into, you know, my upper teens, that's when I started understanding power in terms of the world, right? So more broadly, political power. And as I grew even older and as I started writing, that's when I realized like power is so different in so many places, and it's completely different in America versus what it is in a different country versus what it is in a family here versus what it is elsewhere. And all of those types of power are things that I felt were worth exploring. So that's why it ended up becoming such a big theme in the book.
I was so moved at how much respect you have for your readers. I think when I read young adult and I can just tell like this writer is talking down, right? Like they don't have a sense of the complexities that like young people can hold. And this is a novel where you are really thoughtful about like the nuances, right? And like there's no easy character to just hate or love. Which makes it hard, I think, as a reader. There were so many moments where you're writing point of views and I'm like, no, I don't want to leave this character. And then I get into the next chapter. I'm like, oh, yay, we're here again, right? Can you talk to me about the POVs? My last book had POVs and I don't think I'll ever do that again. Like it was just too many characters and it was hard. And I am not a fantasy writer. Maybe I need to just study your ways. Like How do you
Write
do
a fantasy, Liz. It'll be great. I promise. It's so fun. You'll never go back.
Well, maybe after this advice, I will. How do you do it, Sabaa?
I actually think working as a copy editor in journalism for a long time was super helpful, because I remember like listening as I would hear like daytime editors or other copy editors say, hey, like we need another person to corroborate this, quote or this thing that happened. It was like constant. I would hear that all the time. And that made me think a lot about narratives and how how they are told and how they should be told, and how the second you start writing from a point of view, you are shaping the reader's thoughts. You are like, have any of you guys watched Rings of Power? Yeah. So do you guys remember the scene where he's like, Sauron can sculpt your very thoughts or whatever, right? Like that's what I'm talking about, right? So I feel like you are deciding what the reader sees and what they don't, and I find it to be a fun challenge to myself try to see things from different perspectives. So, for example, with the Ember series, you really do see inside the empire and the folks who are inside it, and then you see outside the empire those who are disenfranchised from the empire. And I feel like that gives a more complete picture of this place. So I do it because I want that complete picture. I want the full story. I want that sense of like you are seeing as much as I can show you in a reasonable fashion. But it also allows for a lot of narrative tension, right? Like if we know something that we really, really want our character to know, but they don't know it, that's really fun. That's fun for me as a writer. That's fun for me to be like, ha, 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 right? And I think that it's fun for the reader too, because they're sitting there being like, oh my God, when are they gonna find this out? And especially if another character knows that information and they're hiding it. That creates these lovely stakes and this wonderful tension that just keeps the action going. So it's also a craft. It's a matter of craft.
Right. I love one thing that you just said, because it leads to this this question I had about the villain, right? You say that you want to sculpt the way the reader sees. The villain of Heir is, I think there are multiple villains. There's the villain, right? But then there's also like poverty turning your face away, the ways that we like, there's all the other ways that it comes through. But this villain, when you think about sculpting what people see, I don't know how much you can tell us or how much you're happy to reveal. Tell us about
I don't want to spoil the book, but there's two main baddies in this book. One is sort of the obvious baddie. She eats hearts. That's not great, right? So that's the more obvious one. But there's another one in the book, and that's the villain you get to watch. You get to see that happen. And that was really, really fascinating to write. The reason I decided to write that is because I had a villain in my first series. He was called the Nightbringer. And I loved writing from his perspective because I felt really bad for him. He was a person whose people had been destroyed, and he wanted vengeance. And I empathize. So I'm like, I get that. And so writing his point of view was really enlightening, but a lot of folks would say like, well, I wish you would write a story about like how exactly it happened. Like you kind of tell us how it happened, but we don't see like the inside of him. Yeah. And so part of why I decided to kind of go on this journey with one of the characters is because I wanted to explore how it happens that you start by making these small decisions and you think they're the right decisions. But every tiny bad decision can lead to a bigger bad decision and a more hurtful decision. And that's sort of the trajectory I wanted to examine as I was writing the book.
Yeah. I think the complexity definitely comes across. And it's hard not to empathize with the second baddie. Like you want to be really angry at them.
It's okay. They're all gonna read it. Don't
fine. Ever invite me for a fantasy, right? Because contemporary, I'm like, everybody's sad and everybody's crying, and that's it. There's no spoiler
it's
here.
Totally fine. Totally fine.
Okay, the character that is evil. Like there was a lot at play, and so I think there was that nuance. I love fantasy. I love romance. I read a lot of romance novels. I think this book had a level of spiciness that I was so intrigued by. How many chili peppers would you give it? right? And tell me a little bit about like how you come in with the romance, and do you consider it romantic fantasy
Okay.
with romance, romancy, which is like the new poppin' term?
Yeah. So here's the thing. I want to make it very clear. This is not an adult fantasy for all y'all Fourth Wing fans out there, okay? I know what you want. This book doesn't have it, okay?
Right.
It is a young adult fantasy, but in that scale, I would give it around 4 chili peppers.
4 chili peppers.
Out of 5. I got another book. We'll go to 5 in the next book.
Okay.
But I'd give it about 4. I feel like that's a fair and reasonable number 4. And I do think that while come on. Sorry, I have Surfs in the front who can help me out here. Been dropping his phone, so thank you. So I feel like that is a fair young adult scale.
4 out of 5.
4 out of 5, I'd say. In terms of whether it's a romantasy or not, so a romantasy, if for those of you who don't know what it is, it's like when a fantasy book has romance as its guiding plot. That's the main plot. I would not consider it a full romantasy, but the romance is a big part of the story. So if you're romantasy and I'm like epic fantasy, I would say Heir is right in between. And that's like a fair look at where it stands. And I think that I've had a few readers come up to me and say, hey, I'm not comfortable reading like really detailed romance scenes, and this was great because it was closed door. It allowed me to just read it without feeling uncomfortable, or like if my mom walked in and opened the book, she would like slap me with it. That is actually what a kid said to me. She was like, I'm really relieved that she couldn't do that.
It felt mindful, right? Like if you're not prepared for this, it's okay. Like you'll get a sense, but we're not. I'd give it 3.
3. Okay, 3. Yeah, 3.
I mean, it's your book. If you want to say 4,
I think
but
3. I think between 3 and 4.
Yeah, depending on like
your
how spicy you like your food.
Exactly.
There we go.
Right. 100%.
Okay. You have awesome fans, right?
Guys.
People show up. Look at this room of people who showed up. Without giving any spoilers, can you talk to us about your fans? Anything that like someone has said or done or gifted you or whatever, like a wonderful story, so that we might know some of the other people who love you as much as we do.
I have a story that I love, and it sort of keeps developing, and I think that's why I love it. There was a reader very early on, so I think she read the Ember arc. Her name is Brittany, and there's another reader, and she lived at that time in New York, and there's another reader who lived in France named Audrey. And they became friends, I think via Twitter, when Twitter was nice, through their mutual love of An Ember in the Ashes, which is my first book. And this friendship grew and grew and grew until last year, I think maybe earlier this year for the first time, they met each other in France, which is so sweet. And then Brittany told me, she's like, hey, I was supposed to come to your Atlanta event, and I'm so sorry, I have bad news. I'm not going to be there because instead I'm going to see you in London with Audrey. So they're coming to London together to see me for an event, and I think it is so sweet. I actually named a character after them. The character the characters in the first series, her name is Abarit. I'm very, very creative. So I named this character after them. That is one of my favorite stories about my readers. And then the other night, it's very sweet. My readers a lot of times will bring me like stuff, like really sweet things. Sometimes paintings, sometimes bracelets, sometimes socks. Socks are always good. But I think the thing that's most precious to me are the letters and the notes, and particularly with all my rage. I got a lot of letters and a lot of notes and a lot of people sharing the inside of themselves, and that's such a gift, and I read every single one and I keep every single one. And I am so fortunate that my readers like trust me with that, like they trust me enough to tell their story to me. Yeah. That's really precious.
Yeah. I love that. Your readers sound sweet.
They're lovely. They're a lovely group of people. Like I don't see a lot of like on my like Instagram, for instance, probably because I block people. If they're mean, I'm like, goodbye, I'm not talking to you anymore. But I also think that in general, they're just nicer to each other. I think the most significant drama has been like, do we like Helene or is she a colonizer? And I was like,
real.
I like Helene and she's a colonizer.
Yeah, wow.
So like, I don't know what to tell you. Like the whole point is to make it difficult for you.
Yeah. Helene. Can you tell me on a personal level what writing this book taught you? And on a craft level,
Yes,
what writing this book taught you?
Yeah, those are good questions. So on a personal level, it taught me that I never want to write contemporary again. I love fantasy. It is like my happy place.
You're one and done?
I am one and done. So I'm gonna share this story to help you guys understand why I'm not gonna write a contemporary again. There are a couple of kids in the audience who are gonna be real annoyed that I'm sharing this story. So a couple of years ago, my kids challenged me to a race. Okay, they were like, "Let's race. It'll be fun." And I was like, "Okay." So I raced them, and I beat them. And they were like, "Rematch." And I was like, "Nope, never again. I have won, and you will never beat me. I have won forever. I am never racing you again." And so they will never race me again. I will always have beat them in the last race, which I think is very important for their humility.
Yes.
So I feel the same way about all my rage. I'm like, I won the things. I'm good. I don't need to write another contemporary book. I did not expect any of it. It totally felt like it came out of the blue. I thought 4 people would read that book, and that was not the case. And I am relieved, and I will not write another one.
Listen, some people don't know when to quit, right? You said at the top. That's when I'm out.
Quit while you're ahead, right?
Oh, I'm so into that. Awesome. Oh.
And then you had said so on
a personal level and on a craft level. What did this book teach you?
Yeah, on a craft level, I think I learned a lot about how to push the craft in ways that made me uncomfortable. So there is I'm not going to say exactly what it is, but there is a twist in this book that was a nightmare to set up. I just want you all to know that. So when you get there, please appreciate it because it took a lot of work. And that twist was something where I was like, can I pull this off? Is it really possible? I don't know if it'll work. And I had to write it and rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it a million times before I finally felt like, okay, I think this is I'm going in the right direction. And then this is where I give shouts to my editor. Yeah. She was amazing. Her name is Ruta. She really helped me figure out how to make that twist work. So I learned a lot about how to push the craft in a direction maybe that felt scary and how rewarding that was in the end. I felt like, okay, I have done something in this book that I never would have been brave enough to do in An Ember in the Ashes or any of the quartet. And I actually think it was All My Rage that gave me that courage because All My Rage also has some similar kind of twists in it, similar things happening, but it was sort of a light version of what you see in this book. So it's kind of hard to answer that without giving anything away. So
well, you did a magic trick. Yes. And I think for the reader, you're like, how did this happen? And I didn't see the sleight of hand.
Right. Yeah.
And as a writer, it was kind of like, oh, I have to restart the book and try to see where it happened.
Where it happens.
It's quite a craft feat.
It was many years in the making, right? And this is why when you hear people say write quickly, you can write quickly, or you can be like us and write slow, but your books are going to be real good. So,
well, I was going to ask you what advice you have because I think I learned so much. I have the pleasure of kicking it with Sabaa, and so we get to go get croissants and talk, and I just take my notes, right, and go home.
We both take notes.
But you have just so much wisdom, right? And I've tried a lot of different ways of writing a book. And the last time, tell your boys, yes, wise one. What advice do you have? What's your go-to piece of advice when someone is like, I'm a writer, I want to write a book, where I don't know what to do. I don't know what to know. What's the thing I should anchor myself to in order to get through to the end of this thing I'm trying to make?
I mean, I think for that specifically, what helped me was advice I got from one of my favorite authors. His name is Terry Brooks. He wrote the Shannara series. I love him. He's an amazing dude. I met him many years ago. I was still writing An Ember in the Ashes, no agent, no publishing house, nothing. And it was a smaller crowd than what he usually had because it was raining in California, and people in California cannot drive in the rain. And so like nobody came to this event. It was like 60 people, and usually he has hundreds. And so I got to meet him, and I was very like shy and like kind of scared, but I was like, just say it. So I told him I'm a writer. And he stood up and he shook my hand. And then he said, I'm going to give you some advice, even though you didn't ask for it. And I was like, no, tell me, give me your wisdom. And then he said something very unexpected. He said, put the writing first. And I was like, okay. And then he like looked me dead in the eyes. Like he pinned me with like a Sauron-like stare. And he said, I mean it. Put the writing first above everything. And when he said that, I was like, oh, you mean like above like sleep and like friends and like my family and my social life and like my health. I'm not saying you should do that as writers, but I'm saying it was really helpful to realize that I was not putting the writing first. If you have a dream, if you have something that you want to do, it deserves your attention. It deserves to be looked at, and it deserves to be like honored with your attention. And I always tell this to young people who are writers. Like the heart of creation is belief. You have to believe that what you are writing or drawing or creating is worth saying, that it is worth putting into the world, and that is difficult. It is difficult to believe that because sometimes people are like, no, you need to do this. You need to pay attention to your school or your kids or your whatever million things that there are to do. But your dream also deserves your attention and belief. So that is the advice that I give to young writers.
Listen, y'all wrote that down? No, but I think that's so true. I mean, anytime I get in front of an audience these days, I say like, there's so much vying for our attention. There are literally machines that have so much money behind them just trying to capture our gaze. And so like when you put that towards your own creativity, towards like, I'm building something out of my own brain, like, I mean, people are trying to get you not to do that.
Yeah,
They're trying
right?
They
want you to look at their creation. Right?
Yeah. So it's subversive in some ways to make in this moment in time.
It absolutely is. And I think one of the most fascinating things that I saw in like the early years of my marriage to my husband was anytime there was like a Super Bowl or the Oscars or anything that was meant to symbolize sort of like people at the pinnacle of their career, craft, whatever, he would be like, well, I'm going to go work on my thing instead of watching this thing. And I started doing that too. And I remember when it happened, I was like watching, I think I was watching the Oscars in like, I don't know, 2008 or 2009. And he said that very casually, not in a judgy way. And I was like, I am too. And I went and I wrote, and it was very empowering.
Wow. You know? Yeah. Yeah.
To be like, I'm not gonna like, okay, I can celebrate people who are doing great things, but I can also celebrate my own idea and I can celebrate my ability to create.
Yeah. I think that it's the accountability to yourself, right? Yeah. We're about to hit questions. So if you've been sitting here thinking of something, you have like a minute to start formulating it into actual language while I ask some lightning questions.
And I have a question for you guys that I will ask right before we start.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have 3 quick questions and one that might be a little slower. Okay. What is your favorite dessert?
Kaiserschmarrn. It is a Viennese fried pancake. It's so good.
That sounds amazing. What is your favorite museum?
The Globe Museum in Vienna. It's all maps and globes, and it's like the coolest thing I've ever seen.
So we have to go to Vienna.
You have to go to Vienna, yes, because Kaiserschmarrn and the Globe Museum.
Well, this one wasn't on here, but what's your favorite place to like travel to?
Oh gosh, anywhere with a beach, man. Anywhere with a beach. The Vienna doesn't have a beach. Yeah, they have lots of museums, but no beaches. Maybe they do, but I didn't see it. Yeah, any place that's sunny and warm that has a beach. Yes.
What is the most memorable headline you wrote when you worked at the Washington Post?
It is Tony Blair likens media to feral beasts. I was so proud of that headline. So that was one. I have another one just real quick. And the second one was the best part of waking up is a sheep's head on your plate. And it was a feature story about a dish served in Iran, which is sheep's head. And like the way they I would not have thought that would be something I'd want to eat. But when I read the description, I was like, that sounds pretty tasty. So those are my 2 favorite headlines. Thank you for asking.
That's wonderful. So what can we expect from the sequel? And personally, when can we expect it?
Well, you get
Your
it
girl
early.
is thirsty. I had a hangover for this book. I was like, I need to know what happened.
I'm currently planning. I originally thought that this book would be out in 2025. I had an outline written. I was like, oh, I'm so ahead of it.
Right.
And then I started writing, and I got about 15,000 words in. I was like, I think this book is bad. So then I scrapped it all, and I am rewriting. So the book will not be out in 2025. I'm very sorry. Probably 2026. Cross your fingers. If we're lucky, say a prayer for me.
Okay. So
but
return to the quartet. Start over.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is, I think, when we'll see the next book. I have a title. I know who dies. So I do have that planned out. So I think you'll be mad. I think you guys are going to be real mad.
Well, I'm glad you take your time, right? Because the work is so deliberate. And although selfishly, I'm like, I want it in January, right? I get it. And thank you for the care and the tenderness with which you write.
I appreciate that.
Of course. So it's on you all. There is a mic here if you want to come kick it with Sebastian near the front.
And I will ask you guys a question to get you guys warmed up. Did anyone travel from an hour away? All right, I see hands. Did anyone travel from 2 hours away?
Wowza.
Okay, 3 hours.
Listen.
Okay, 4 hours. Woo. Okay, how many we got, Sebastian?
1, 2.
Okay, 5 hours?
Right here. There's a hand.
Where?
We got a 4.5 hand.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So how far did you travel? Okay, you win. I have something for you if you come up. Please come and grab it. You get something for traveling very far. Thank you so much. That is an honor.
Wow, yeah. You want to talk about attention, right? Like, that's beautiful. What a beautiful gift you all give us when you like show up.
Oh God, you're looking at me. Jesus.
Hi. I love your jacket.
I love you. So
Thank you.
I was blessed to receive an arc of Heir. How dare you, first of all. But also, I was very impressed, and I think James Akinaka also said it, about the balance that you had with your characters. And I was wondering, from a craft level, how do you balance creating voice and distinct personalities to the new characters and making you fall so in love with them while keeping true and showing homage to the growth of the pre-existing characters as well?
That's a great question. So I get really deep in my characters' heads by interviewing them, which is weird. But what it is I have a list of questions and then I pretend to be them and I answer in a British accent in my office.
Naturally.
So if my children are walking by, they're like, oh God, she's doing that weird thing again. That is how I get to know my characters really well. And then what I do is I try to imagine them in different situations. I try to find like the one or two lines that seem very much their voice. Sometimes those lines don't make it in, but a lot of times they do. And then what I try to do is have their goals, their motivations, their conflicts in my head. And I actually, as I'm writing, I put that as the header for every chapter. Where are they on this arc? Where are they on this journey? Are they getting pushed back right now? Are they making any progress? What has happened to cause their life to be difficult? And that is how I kind of built these characters out, is sort of through those interviews to get to know them, and then keeping a very almost like forensic attention on their arc, and making sure the growth feels real instead of magical and like, oh, they're so smart, right? Like my characters grow very slowly. So in the first series, those characters, it takes a long time for that. And because I felt like that was realistic, it would not be real for them to go from terrified to brave and, conquering the world in one book. Like that didn't really work. So that's what I do for it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. My question is, so I think as a novelist myself, I think a lot about how it's really difficult, I think, especially when you take a long time to write a book. You change a lot throughout that process. I know Ember took like, I think 7 years, if I'm correct, to write. I'm also a very slow writer. So especially, thank you. Especially for younger people, I think, whose lives are changing a lot all the time. I just wanted to ask you about like your experience and any advice you might have about staying true to your story, even as you yourself, the author, are changing a lot very rapidly.
These are all such good questions. I would be so bad at questions if I was in the audience. I'd be like, "What's your favorite animal?" So I think that you have to love all the versions of yourself, including the young version of you who first came up with a story. There were definitely times when I was writing Ember and I was like, I don't know if this really works as a story anymore, because I felt like I had grown a lot and learned a lot. But I tried to go back to the original like fire, the original reason that I wanted to write the book. Whatever that reason is, that is the thing that I think you have to turn toward and you have to remind yourself of. I also think that it's so easy to, like, the world kind of tells us to look at our past selves as not good enough. Like, we're always supposed to be improving and getting better and being smarter. And yes, like, there's the hope that the last book I write is the best book I write, of course. But at the same time, like, there's a line from an Ani DiFranco song where she's like, a record of an event, and the event is making music, right? She's talking about why a record is called a record. And it's kind of the same thing, right? It's like, this is a record of your creativity. Honor that. It's okay if it's not perfect. I've reread Ember like 4 times. I've listened to it again and again. There are things in that book where I'm like, oh, but that's okay. That's what Sabaa of that era wrote, and she learned from that, and she's writing different and different and better books now. And to be able to look back, hopefully, on all the things you've written at the end of your life and watch your own story being told, that's a gift, right? And I learned all this, by the way, from Ursula Le Guin. If you want a really good book to read about being an author and having created for your whole life, read her book, No Time to Spare. It's a bunch of essays. Some of them are about her cat, but all of them are very, very helpful, like especially if you're a creator.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, this is sort of an open-ended question about your writing process. Was there a particular like scene or like moment in writing this novel that you really struggled with, and how did you work through that?
All of it. There were a lot of scenes, but there was one in particular, and it was a scene where something very, very, very bad happens. And I was like, how do I write this without it seeming like I'm reveling in the badness of what's happening, but also like honor like the turning point for one of the characters. That was very difficult to write, and it took me many weeks. And what I find in those situations is I just need to step away and work on another part of the book or do something else work-related, like, I don't know, stare at the ceiling for a while and hope an idea comes to me. But I can't. You can't force those moments. Like, what about you? Like, when you're like stuck, what do you do? I would like to know. Teach me.
I think the poet in me is kind of trained to try to come at it from a different doorway. And so can I write this from a different point of view? Can I write this with the setting different? Can I write this as a dream sequence? And so just kind of trying to knock on that door over and over, but in different ways. Yeah, until sometimes whatever the draft I'm on will take me back to the first draft and I'm like, oh, it was there. I just didn't push in this way.
Yeah.
But I think reading, often when I read other books, the writing brain is still working and starts trying to like solve the problem through other people's words. And so taking the time away, reading something else, I'll come back and it's like the brain just caught up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's a great answer. Thank you. Hello.
Hi. So I was wondering, with book talk and all the like fast fashion almost through books of like just really focusing on the consumerist aspect of making the most hits and making it the most popular, how do you make sure your books are staying true to your like personal message and your personal like agenda through writing books? Like, how do you separate yourself from the like popular ideas of like our current era through social media and like just like our current social system?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think anyone who's read my books would think that I align with maybe popular ideas, particularly about things like colonization, collective punishment, current conflicts on the planet. I just feel like it's all there in my work, and I think honestly, it's the time. Like I just, but I actually have a different view. I think about sort of this idea of like the commercialization of reading. I don't mind it that much. Like I really like that people are getting excited about, even if they're excited about one book or one author. I have the opinion that like a rising tide kind of lifts all ships. So when you have one book that brings tons of people into a bookstore to get it, other books get picked up too. Maybe ones that you wouldn't have expect to pick up. Like you get pulled into a store because of that. And I've met hundreds of readers at this point who are like, I would not have read your book if I had not read this one first, and that one first is usually one that's much more popular. So I actually really kind of like the way that books have become like cool. I mean, they've always been cool to me, but like I like how they're something that we make an aesthetic about it, and we have clothing that's like book centered, and we have this whole world around the idea of books. And I know there's a lot of folks who are like, oh my gosh, like they're not actual readers. They just like make it look pretty. Well, how do you know? Like I have spent a long time like creating a book aesthetic, and it's because I love the book so deeply that I like want to make it beautiful so everyone else will want to read it. So that's kind of it's not an answer. It's more like I'm going back to I think the original question, saying I actually like that part of the reading world today. So
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Hi.
Hello, Salam.
So I actually have a question about character building. When writing traditionally flawed or multidimensional characters, how do you avoid like your bias opinions and your perspective of what you fit in a box of right and wrong when creating a character, and how do you still like love them after all of that?
I really want to hear your answer to this too, actually. I love them because I know them so well. And I think if I know the why, if I know the motivation, a lot of times I get it. Like I understand why they would do certain things, and you spend enough time with them and you're kind of like, yeah, I do hope you succeed. But then you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just wanted the Nightbringer to succeed in the terrible thing he wants to do. But it's because you really empathize with the character. I also think I'm not writing the book to judge, I guess, right? Like I'm not writing the book to say something about a character. I'm usually writing a book to say something about how the world treats the character. Like how they are living in this world that kind of usually sucks and how they're surviving it. So it's like my commentary is usually about the world and not the person trying to survive the world.
I think writing should be a way to practice empathy. I think for me it is, especially if I'm writing more than one point of view, it's really hard to write from a character's point of view and not want to show why they are how they are and not love them. And I kind of find a lot of joy in writing the point of views of people I don't understand. I mostly write a lot of mothers and daughters, and my latest book, there were a lot of moms, and having to kind of look at the same moment from both perspectives and say, this is how the young person feels, and all of the things that come out that felt very natural to me. And then having to write the mother's perspective of that same moment and like, oh, I don't know, bless you, what that moment might have been, but like, how do I lend myself to trying to see? And through trying to see, I'm like, oh, I feel so tender towards this character, right? Like the original character was wrong. And it's just like that practice of, I think when Sabaa mentioned all the questions you ask a character, it's a getting to know them, right? And knowing their story, it's so hard not to love someone who you're writing if you're in with them on how they were made, right?
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello.
We have time for like 3 more questions. So I want folks to just be.
All right, we'll try to answer fast.
So I'm a fellow journalism editor, and I was really wondering how journalism touched on your writing. Like, how did it strengthen your writing?
Oh gosh, it had a huge impact. I don't know if any of my like old journalism friends are in the audience, but if they've heard this answer before, but like journalism taught me like the skeleton of a story. It taught me to understand like what a story should feel like, what it should look like, what it means to look at multiple angles of a story, how like what it means to write sparingly, what it means to pull back and not like on the page. I always wanted to be like a really poetic writer. I wanted to write like Laini Taylor, who's like a very lush poetic writer. And I started writing and like, I was like, oh, I think my sentences are like a little too short for this. And I started realizing that my own method was different. It was slightly more journalistic in nature. It was like a little harder and a little like, I don't know what you'd call it, like sharper. And I think journalism taught me that. It taught me to get to the point. There's a great piece of advice that my friend Nicola Yoon shares sometimes, where she had a professor who said, sometimes a rug is just a rug. And it's like sometimes you just say what is happening and you don't sort of go deep beyond that. Like all you need is the surface. And then you can explore deeper later. So journalism taught me that. It also taught me about deadline and taught me how badly I can blow them, which is a lot. Like I can go way past the deadline and still not get fired. So that's good.
Thank you.
Hi. My question's not nearly as poetic as all the other ones you've done,
worries.
but you're the first author I wanted to come out and see, so I figured I'd ask.
Thanks for coming.
How do you name your characters, right? Like, I know, is it like a cultural influence? Do you go down like a baby book of names and just like pick one out, or do they like mean something to you? I know you mentioned
They
one
all
was, like, a
mean they all
fan.
mean something. Yeah, they all mean something. I am, of course, immediately, because I am nervous forgetting the meaning right now. But Sirsha is actually based on a Bengali name. So I have a friend. She's a fellow. She's in the book world. She's a bookstagrammer. Her name is Azanta. She's Bengali, and actually, like that originally is what made me think like, oh, like I should use a Bengali name, because like I kind of had her in my head as I was creating one of the characters. And so I saw the name Sirsha and I was like, oh, like I like that. I'm going to change it a little bit. And it's a flower. And I thought it was like really beautiful. Laya, the name Laya means sweet voiced. The name Elias is Hebrew and it means the Lord is my God, which to me sort of implies surrender, which is a huge part of Elias's story. So all the major names have meaning. Karis is a type of dagger, and she was in An Ember in the Ashes. And if you guys know who Karis is, you're like, fits. So that's the names all have meaning. But I absolutely do have a baby book, and it is extremely awkward when I'm looking through it, and people are like, oh, congratulations, and I'm like, oh no, been there, done that. So that's where I get the names.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Sabaa and Elizabeth, I love your books, and I'm just excited to be here. Oh, can I adjust this? Okay, cool. My question was more of just as women of color and discussing like deep topics in regards to like, colonialism and systemic racism, like in your books. How do you manage to balance being able to discuss such heavy concepts without taking away some of that joy that you were talking about earlier? And be able to stick to the plot, because sometimes these things can be so heavy because they impact our own lives, and it's different talking about it being an outsider versus someone who has to like fight it every day to survive. So I know this is a thick question, so I'm sorry, but how do you go about that with writing?
I think it's a great question. I laughed so many times while reading this and was just like, how did you get humor in a book that's like has all these big things? So I'm also curious.
So I think my books serve as therapy for me. And a lot of times they let me have the vengeance in the book that I don't get to have in real life. But I mean that. Like, I look at what's happening and I'm like, and I need a place to put the things I wish would happen, right? So like that is sometimes how I am able to balance. But it is also about finding the moments of humanity. humor and romance and like found family and like the brotherhood between two characters, the awkwardness, you know, between two characters, the things that you don't want to happen, and then you're like, oh, this author is about to put me through this, and then they do, and then you're like, oh, how am I going to get out of it? Like, also just like making the book a little stressful in multiple ways. So not just having it be the stress of like, are they going to get caught? Is something bad going to happen? But also the stress of like, will they, won't they? Right? Like that is also a fun. So it's really injecting all these human moments into a story to make it feel less heavy. You know, this book had a lot of banter in it. I had a lot of fun with those. I look forward to, there was one chapter, I think it's chapter 17, absolute favorite to write. If you're a trope person, there is a fake engagement in this story. So juicy to write, so much fun, and that's the type of thing that I use to kind of carry me through the harder parts.
Thank you.
We are almost done. Hello.
Hi, I'll be quick. So as a writer, one of the hardest things for me is like, as the way they always put it, kill your darlings. Like editing, having people, you know, like get rid of the parts that you really love. How do you do that?
Oh, I mean, I like mutter and hatred at them while I'm erasing what they told me to erase. Usually you have to accept that sometimes you're too attached to things. That's a real thing that happens. I'm sure it's happened to you. Like, if you love a line a ton, maybe it shouldn't be in the book. I mean, sometimes it should still. Like, there are lines that I really love that I was like, no, I'm keeping this no matter what. But if it's not serving a purpose towards sort of the overall story, then I think that's when I'm like, okay, this needs to get cut. But it's why you choose editors, friends, beta readers who you trust, because they will tell you the truth. My first beta reader, the person who said, too stupid to live, that person also was like, this is dumb, this is dumb, this is dumb. And I was really grateful, but also wanted to kill her. Like, it was both. Like, I was like, you're the best, but also I want to kick your face because this is so mean and it's hurting my feelings and I love this book and I don't understand why you're being so mean. Like, it is an emotional experience.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, so
It should be.
It should be.
You
So
made
it's just,
something.
it is just about kind of having people you trust and then also not taking out the things that you believe in. I had an editor who suggested that I take something out of All My Rage that was essential to the book. And I was like, okay, maybe I should take it out. And then ultimately I didn't. And I think that's actually why the book ended up finding the readership it did.
Thank you.
Last question.
I'm really excited to be here. Thank you, both of you, for being here. I love family lore, by the way.
So good, right?
Yeah, I was like, okay, it's given my family, but anyway.
More chili peppers.
Yeah. So my question to you would be, when you're writing, do you ever have moments to where you're like, it seems like really, really hard to finish? And if so, in what ways did you have to discipline yourself to see the project through to the end?
Good one. Do you have any thoughts? I need a second.
I think that I work on a lot of different things at once. And so it means that I don't have to stop my creative brain from working when I'm at a place where I realize that maybe I'm so emotionally invested that I don't have the clarity to write through, right? And so I can go and turn my creative energy over here and just let that kind of rest. I also like to journal. When I reach a place in my writing that is hard, I will just turn to an actual journal that I know no one will ever see this, and I will write through what is it that is difficult about this work. What is it that's kind of the block, right? Because sometimes I can't do the creative part if I haven't faced it in my own life. I think that it's really helpful to have distance from some of the things that we write, because while it might be cathartic, it's not something that's made to be published. Right? It's not something we're ready to have critiqued if it's too fresh, if it's too much of an open wound. When you have distance and it's scarred over, it's a little easier to say, now I can see it for what it was. And so I try to be really judicious about what I need space from that I haven't yet healed. And so I can't write about that. And what I can face and say, okay, I have something to say about this versus just a recording of what happened.
Yeah, that was great advice, and I'm totally stealing the journal thing because I've never done that. So well advised. I would just sort of add to what Liz said in that I do find other art to be very helpful in those moments. I find poetry to be very helpful. I find television to be really helpful. Just an understanding that like this is what a complete story looks like. Like I will go rewatch my favorites and be like, this is what it feels to complete a story. This is what it feels like as a consumer of that story, to like the satisfaction of it. And that can be really helpful in one, getting the ideas going again and kind of refilling your creative well. Because generally when I'm struggling with the end of a story, it's because my creative well is empty. I've been working really hard. I just can't. I also sometimes, I have turned in books that have no ending.
I'm stealing that.
Yeah, I've turned in books that have no ending. So the book Reaper, I turned it in. I mean, we were talking, I was deep in edits. Like they were like, this is coming out soon. Like we need an ending. And I was like, I don't know what it is yet. And I just kept trying to figure it out. And then eventually, in sort of uncomfortable amount of closeness to the deadline, I wrote an ending and I turned it in. And then I changed it. So they love me at Penguin. They're like, oh God, this person and her like deranged, like deadline problems. So I do think that sometimes it just takes time, and you have to let yourself take the time it takes.
All right,
We went 3 minutes over. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys. Let's hear it one more time for Elizabeth, for Sabaa, and for Heir.